Today we've got a Nintendo Switch with no power and a very visibly damaged charge port. So as you can see, we've got a couple of pins pushed in here on this side of the port, and this is the downside of USB-C. Alright, these are not the worst to take apart, but if you haven't done it before, there are a few things you should know. One, I would recommend that you have the right tools for the job. You do need a Phillips driver that will fit the screws. Also a Y00 tri-wing or tri-point, whichever you prefer to call it. And I like to use these triangle picks from iFixit as well as their Halberd spudgers. These are great for releasing the little gates where the flex cables are plugged in with a very low risk of damage. Whereas if you use something like a spudger or pry tool like this or something else, that becomes a liability. The other thing is that there's a very weak spot right here, which you can see is actually already gone from where the game card goes in. So there's a thin strip of plastic here. If you're careful about prying this thing open and you start from the bottom side, you shouldn't have that problem, but you do need to exercise caution when removing and installing this shell right here, because this thing is just super weak. Alright, so first thing I always do is make sure there is no game card installed. See if we have a micro SD, and if not, then we can proceed. And the next thing is remember to keep your screws organized, whether you lay them out on a magnetic mat or if you have something like the one that I'm working with now. There's actually little sections for each step that you do. Whatever works for you, as long as you can remember it. These screws on the bottom here, these are Phillips, and a lot of times they're not even present because for some reason the plastic on the inside breaks out and they are not magnetic. So putting them back in is always fun because they will not stick to your screwdriver. So you have two on the bottom there, and then you'll have two on the top on either side here. These are all the same size, by the way, so they are interchangeable. Alright, so I'm going to put these in my outer case section. And then we're going to take out these Y-shape or tri-point screws. There's 4 on the back. Okay, now we have all the screws removed from the case. You just want to carefully pry down here along the bottom edge. Something like this should work. I like to come in this way and just work your way around the case, and it should disengage without a whole lot of effort. And this one likes to pop back on, so let's go this way. I'll hold that, and I'm just going very shallow here along the edges. And from there, you can see this case is actually cracked here also, so it's had a bit of use and abuse. Okay, so we'll lift here, and then like I said, you just want to be really careful here because that thin piece, which is already broken, is easy to damage. And we're just gonna pull this away like so. And then when you go to reinstall it, if you tuck this in on the top first and make sure it's lined up properly, that is the best way to put this back on without putting any stress on that area. Alright, so back shell is off. Now we have some screws to remove from the back. There are 4 that hold on this little metal plate. One here, and these are all the same size except for one right over here. And then we've got one slightly different screw here. It's going to be gold instead of silver. So make sure to take a note of that. And this one almost feels like it's stripped out. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we can lift the plate, because that is just spinning around on the inside right now. And you can see we've got some soda or something liquid got spilled in here. I'm going to have to break this off. I hate to say, we can't spin this around because that connector's in the way. Yeah, this panel, I don't really see any other way to remove it. What in the heck happened to this thing? Alright, so I'm just going to break this panel off. Alright, looks like what happened is this screw got turned too far and the plastic anchor behind it is just spinning around, so it doesn't do any good regardless. We're not really missing anything, so let's go ahead and move on here. Once you get the metal panel off the back, we want to disconnect the battery, and in order to do that we need to move this ribbon cable out of the way, and that is what I like these for. These have a very, very thin edge. Get underneath here and get as much of this connector as you can at one time, and just gently lift, and then you can slide this out. And you got this little hook thing here too if you want to use that to grab a hold of the cable. Pretty cool. Now we want to get underneath here with as much as we can, and this is a situation where I probably would use a regular spudger. However, because of its location, if you're careful with the regular pair of tweezers, you can get underneath here and just lift straight up. Just get underneath as much of the cable as you can, pull it away from the board, and now we have no power running through the device at this point. Once I get the metal panel off, I do like to add some rubbing alcohol right here to this little piece of foam, and we'll try to get that off neatly. Sometimes you can get the adhesive to release if you just let that sit with some 99% for a minute or so while we're taking out these three screws here, here, and here. Alright, so there will be a very small amount of resistance here. So we got some thermal paste underneath, and then if you work your way across this foam, sometimes you can get it off in one piece when it wants to cooperate. And again, this is a decent tool for the job. Alright, so there's that. Set that aside. And I like to disconnect as many cables as possible at this point, so we are going to release one here for the game card reader. And we've got our two antenna wires, so make sure you're only getting underneath the middle piece and lifting straight up on these, and you're not pushing down on anything else in the process. Get those out of the way. We've got a connector here that we're going to lift. Okay, and then I think this one will wait on. It's a little tricky to get to, but you can go ahead and pop this one up too. Now we've got 7 screws right up in this area. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And these are all for the headphone jack / game card reader. And if you've already released that, you can now just kind of slide this thing, lift it up, slide it over to the left, like so. Set that aside. And I'm going to recommend that you take out these 2 screws here. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit because I meant to warn you that as soon as you remove this thing, or actually when you get ready to, as soon as you lift this off, you need to keep a close eye not only on this little silicone piece, but on this right here, because there's not much holding it in place, and there is a spring down inside here that you don't want to lose. So you just want to very carefully lift it up from the left-hand side first, and then the right, and then make sure the spring doesn't go flying. And you can see that needs to tuck down into this area here, as well as having this piece go inside here, and then as you compress the spring, you can put the left side back in like so. So a little trick to it there. Hopefully that'll help you get it back together, because we do need to remove this, and there's a little rubber piece underneath here that you want to make sure that you keep track of. So when you take out these gold screws, which are actually different than the silver ones that we've been working with, make sure you don't get those mixed up. See, this thing's pretty dirty on the inside too. Okay, and as we lift out this controller, you want to make sure you don't lose this and keep track of where it goes, which is right there. Alright, so we'll set that off to the side as well. And at this point, I'm going to release the main LCD connector here. You might not necessarily want to use this tool. I like to kind of grab, oops, I got it backwards. I like to grab as much as I can here. You can come under this way. If we had a longer, flatter tool, that would be better. I generally use my fingernail on this one, but I do have a little practice with this, so do be careful. You don't want to damage that. It should flip up without the need for a lot of force being applied. Okay, so now we have 2 screws down here for the charge port, and then we've got one right over here, and we've got another right over here that are going to come out. These are the silver screws at the bottom, as well as this one right here. And that is the one that isn't coming out. But we do have this one right over here. And let's go ahead and unplug all of our cables fully before we go any further. So let's see if we can grab this with the hook. I think. Yeah. Sometimes it works, sometimes tweezers are better. And in fact, in most of these situations, I'm going to get right behind them and just pull them away like so. Again, just don't put much pressure on them. They should slide out. And here's one that I had not yet unhooked. Okay. And we've got 2 more. Right here and here. Alright, now what might happen is this thing may kind of need to be maneuvered down here in order to release the motherboard. So when you go to lift this up, you'll see that it's kind of latched in down here at the bottom, and it may come out completely. That's okay if it does. Well, it actually stuck with us this time, but usually this thing will come off. And for the repair that I'm doing, I'm going to go ahead and unplug it. So very carefully try to grab this at the base if you can. Just gently pull it away like so. And now we have our motherboard removed. Alright, so a couple things here that I was going to mention. As you can see, our little plastic anchor, for whatever reason, completely broken off inside. So now we can get a hold of this thing and remove it. This is the first time I've ever seen this happen either. Kind of strange. Okay, so now that I'm gripping this, the screw will actually, hopefully, come out. And that is not going to do us much good anymore. So we could try to glue this in, but this is not critical. I am confident that metal shield will be okay with the other 3 screws that are holding it in place. I am, however, going to remove this little silicone piece here from the corner so we can just be working on this area itself and not lose anything in the process. Now, in my experience, the fastest, easiest way to get this thing off is to use a pretty decent amount of airflow. So I am going to tape off these components that are surrounding the port just to be safe. We don't want those blowing off, but let's not cover up the anchors. Alright, so yeah. Alright, that should do the trick. We're going to come in here at 470C and 70 airflow. And fortunately, because this is towards the edge of the board, it doesn't take too long to melt. Just be sure you don't blow the air directly in this area, and if you do, you want to tape that off as well to be safe. Flux. Okay, I think we're ready for our new port, but just out of curiosity, I'm going to flip it over anyways. I always like to check the charging IC and make sure we don't have any issues right here. So this is, you'll recognize it if you've looked at the original Switch. We got the M92T36 right here on the back, and the BQ, I can never remember full designation. The BQ24198 right next to it. Got our coil here. Got our diode right down there. But mainly what I want to check is to see that all of these capacitors surrounding the charging IC show the proper resistance value. So I'm just going to check in continuity mode, make sure we don't have any beeps. That will be sufficient for now. Let's see, where's our ground at? Okay. Okay, so this will be ground here, and not ground, not ground, not ground. Okay, so it looks like everything is clear. That should be. Go ahead and put our new port in, and we can get this thing back together. All right, we'll clean this up a little bit first. Let's get this old solder off. Some leaded solder. And of course the fun part is, well, let's see if our port fits, because it looks like we've got some leftover stuff here that didn't quite come out. Yeah, you know what, we'll just go ahead and take it out right now. That should be good. Let's find out. Alright, that looks flush. Somewhat. Alright. I think that stuff is kind of in my way still. Stubborn. Alright. Now, this will fit. There we go. That's what we're looking for. Alright, so we will pre-solder these dudes here because you can't really see the back side of this thing when we install it. We want to make sure that we get good contact. So we'll add a little leaded solder here on the back. Actually, add it to both. No reason not to. Right. Now the nice thing is we don't need quite as much heat because we've got leaded solder here, the lower melting point. And what I'm going to do is get flux all over this, let it melt a bit. Okay, because you know that flux is going to get blown away while we're heating this up, so let's get our port. And if we set it here, now we got plenty of flux on the bottom side of the port. As you can see, I'm going to drop my hot air down to 460 at 60 airflow. And we just need to heat this up until we see the solder turn molten, and then we can drop our port in. And be mindful of the connector right above this because it does like to melt pretty easily. And you can see I missed a little solder up there in the top left hand corner, but that's okay, we can always add to that one. Alright, you can see it's starting to melt. Oh, actually it did run out good. Okay, set this down. Give it a little pressure. Keep heating it until we are confident that everything is melted and stuck. You see that? Right. Okay, and once that goes solid, flip it over and hit our anchors. We want enough heat and solder to make sure that these flow through to the other side, but we don't want to get an excess of solder. flip this around for a better angle. These little holes right here, I don't think they're all that important, but they are soldered in, so fill those up. That should be sufficient. Let's take a look at the other side. Before we clean it, make sure that we got everything through. As you can see, we've got solder all the way onto this side here. Let's see. Get focused. Okay, so that flowed through all the way, including the back legs. Where are you? So we are good. You can always heat them from this side if you want to, with the iron, if you want to flow them out a little bit more. But these look pretty clean. So now we just need some rubbing alcohol to get rid of all this flux. And we'll be ready to reassemble. Now before we put this back together, we do want to make sure that it is going to charge the battery. So I'm going to plug in our USB-C charger here, set my multimeter to voltage mode, and if we check the pin that is on the furthest from us, we should have 4 volts up here on the battery terminal all the way at this end. And as you can see, we have 4.14. So that looks good. Actually, let's go ahead and flip it around the opposite direction just to make sure we have 4 volts still. Okay, and there is no video output on this one, so we don't have to worry about testing that. We can go ahead and get this back together. Now, of course, we are going to replace this thermal paste, because as you can see, I don't know what's in the middle of that, but let's clean that up and put some new stuff on there. Actually, we'll wait until we get ready to put the heat pipe back in. Go ahead and clean this off at least a bit in the center. They really put a lot of paste on these things. I would say it's a bit excessive. Okay, just remember that you will have one screw that I don't right over here, since mine was broken. So I can't really show you that part. Alright, so we've got this that goes on the back like so. Make sure we get this centered. Actually, let's not even do that. Let's just take this rubber piece and set it right in there. It'll make life easier. Watch out for all your cables, because this is fun to put together. And yes, I'm being sarcastic. This is not my favorite. Got so many little cables you have to watch out for in this thing. It's a real blast. Alright, so we're going to come in this way. Try to get underneath all this stuff. Make sure this is tucked in here. Don't let this cable get stuck behind. It's no cable left behind. Right. Oh, and one other thing. This piece, which as you remember I removed, if you have the board slightly installed, you can just lift it up a hair, and usually you can get this thing to maneuver into position like so. And then let's start getting some of these gold screws in. Remember, we have 3 over here on the left hand side. 2 of them go through this speaker. I'm sorry, 1 of them goes through the speaker. Not 2. Alright, and we've got one all the way up here. No, we don't. We have one all the way up here. And don't forget to plug in this one. Let's see, right here. Yeah, this is fun. All right. Yeah, so these are fun, and you may need some magnification to see what you're doing. You want to be very careful with these cables, especially the LCD cable. If you snag any of the pins on the inside, that can be a problem. But these tend to go, and me doing this without magnification is a little tricky. I normally do these under the microscope. Be very careful, this should go in pretty easy. If it doesn't, you don't want to force it. Alright, so I think we're all the way in here. Go ahead and flip that down. And then let's see. And you can see one of our cables got trapped under the board here, but we should be able to fish that out without any issues. Just pull it straight back and up. Okay, make sure this is open. Alright, so we're going to get this tucked in here. Make sure it goes all the way in and level with that line. Flip that gate down. And then this is the one that I just plugged in, but I'm going to go ahead and leave this under the scope so you can see. This LCD connector you want to be careful with. Keep everything straight. Make sure the gate is open. We're just going to kind of bend this downwards a bit, like so. And then what you want to do is make sure you get it inside like that. Okay, and we're good. Flip this down. Be very careful with these gates. They are fragile. And let's see, if we go down right across here, we'll go ahead and get our fan plugged in. You can see our gate opened up, so we need to, or closed, we need to make sure we open that up. Here, I'm going to turn it this way. And if that got trapped under the board, you should be able to pull it out from underneath, hopefully without taking anything out. You stay open, you plug in. There we go. Alright, and while we're at it here, let's do our antenna wires. You want to make sure these are lined up perfectly because they are easy to damage. Those snap in. If you get a lot of resistance, don't force it. These are kind of easy to break if you're not careful. We don't want to plug in the battery just yet. Go ahead and get the rest of our screws in and our thermal paste. So remember this trigger. This is fun. So we're going to go in the corner first, and then you need to make sure the spring is compressed enough to get down inside of that little channel, and then you're going to get this last piece in over here. Let's keep this in position like so. Push it down, make sure it's clicking. If you do that, you're good. Let's go ahead and put our silver screws in. Remember we had three, one here, here, and one up there. All the same. Right, we can put our little rubber piece, let's see. Yeah, we'll just set it down here. This goes right on top, and when you push down, you should feel it click, like so. And then remember we have two silver screws to hold that down. I'm sorry, two gold screws. Two gold screws. Alright, we can get our game card reader back in. And we've got to feed this cable through. Fold that down. And then we've got 7 silver screws going in. All right, we are almost done. Okay, that's clicking, and that's clicking. I need to get this guy back in, so let's get our thermal paste. Should we douse it like Nintendo does? Nah. Just enough so that when we cover this, it spreads out. Now this outer piece only touches the metal plate on the back, so I don't worry too much about that. We can add a couple drops here, and they will be fine. Not nearly as critical, but we do want to have some material there. And before we put our plate back on, we need to plug in our battery and this cable right here. So let's do the battery first. Push straight down, it should snap into place like that. And then we have this cable, which is going to be fun. Let's see if we can do it without the microscope here. Alright, we are in. Clamp that down. And remember, unfortunately, there's no soda inside here that I noticed, so that's good. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4 screws. I do not have this screw, and that is not a huge deal. Very strange. I've never seen one break off like that inside before, unless someone's worked on this thing before me, which is entirely possible. Right, so remember, we want to come in from the top with this piece so that you can avoid what happened here. So we'll latch that around the top end. Find the button just like that. This will kind of snap into place. Secure the bottom, get our remaining screws in, and then we will plug this guy into the electricity. And then these fun ones. I love these. So you're just going to have to kind of set these into place by hand because they won't attach to your screwdriver very easily. And yes, normally I would have tested this much sooner, but I am confident that we have a good charging system. You can see the thing about this, the only negative here is that when that piece breaks out, your little card slot cover doesn't really stay in. But that is just how it goes sometimes. Let's plug this in and see if it lights up. Okay, you can see we're charging. I'll let that sit for a minute and we'll be back. Okay, I've had this on the charger for a while. It did actually boot up. I just turned it off so that you can see that we are lighting up. And momentarily, you'll see that the battery is still low. We're only at 12% right now, but we'll let that sit, and there we go. We are ready to game again.